All right, folks. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. My name is Connie Brom, and I am the Communications and Community Engagement Manager with the Indiana Arts Commission, and I'd like to welcome you to the Indiana Arts Homecoming. I'm pleased to welcome you to this session, Messaging Matters, Communicating from a Position of Strength with Pam Breaux, Bridget Eckert, and myself. Before I turn it over to Pam to start off our presentation, I'm just going to go over a couple of things. Please remain muted during the presentation until the Q&A so we can give our full attention to all of today's presenters. Feel free to utilize the chat function to introduce yourself and ask questions throughout the session. If you'd like to rename yourself in Zoom, you can do so by hovering over your image, clicking the three dots, and selecting Rename. Captioning is also available during this session and throughout the entire conference, and you can turn those on by clicking the closed caption button in your bottom navigation bar. And finally, if you have any tech questions or other questions throughout the session, please feel free to send either myself or Bridget Eckert from the IAC a direct message in the chat. And with that, I am so honored to turn it over to Pam to get us started.
Thanks so much, Connie. And hello, everyone. Hello, Hoosiers. It's a pleasure to be with you for your arts homecoming in the wonderful state of Indiana. I love that term, homecoming. It brings to me and it brings to mind some beautiful places, right? It brings to mind good music, good friends, good food. So thanks for inviting me to the party. Before I dive into my remarks, I'd like to share a little bit more about the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies. We're also known as NASA. We are a nonpartisan professional association for all of the state arts councils across America. So your very own Indiana Arts Commission is a member of NASA, as are the arts commissions in all of the 56 states and jurisdictions. I'm also proud to share that your very own Louis Rickey was a recent and extraordinary NASA board member. So we're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that conducts research on public support for the arts. We also advocate for the arts, and we facilitate learning and knowledge sharing between state arts agencies, all designed to strengthen state arts agencies. So it's our job to keep an eye on national trends, to identify challenges and opportunities for the arts field, to notice what's different from state to state, and to identify things we all have in common. So it's from that vantage point that I'll be speaking with you today. I'll be sharing some messaging research that NASA believes has the potential to really help arts leaders, arts educators, and cultural advocates like you. I'll be offering a narrative frame that you can use to tell your own story and garner greater support for what you do for Indiana communities. This is national research, but it has local relevance, and I hope you find it useful. So Connie, can we begin with the first slide? And I'm going to begin with challenges. Let me set the stage by offering 3 observations about some sticking points or some challenges I see facing advocacy. 3 big ones. So number 1, when times get tough, the arts get cut. We get squeezed out of the classroom too often, and sometimes get pushed to the margins in the face of other priorities. In other words, the arts get marginalized as a nicety rather than a necessity. And, I can guess this makes you crazy. It makes me a little nuts, and many days I'm so over it. But it's a problem I believe we can solve through persistent advocacy and smart messaging. So second issue, our talking points often revolve around what we need or what we lack rather than what we add. Now, don't get me wrong, shortages are real. And we've got to ask for what we need, right? Whether we're talking to donors or elected officials. But leading with needing, that's leading with needing, is not getting the job done, right? It's not growing support for our cause over the long term. We have an opportunity to flip the script. right? To offer a positive story about what the arts contribute to families, communities, the economy, and education. So the research I'm going to present shows us how to do that. Third advocacy issue, we must work across the full political spectrum. We know that our country is extremely polarized right now, which is a source of great sorrow, I believe. But the arts don't need to be a polarizing issue. The arts can be a consensus point if we calibrate our messages to appeal to universal values, right? So these are the big picture challenges that NASA set out to address. And they are the impetus for the message guide that I'll be sharing with you today. So slide 2. So the insights I'll be presenting originate from a research project entitled Arts and Creativity Strengthen Our Nation. It shows us how the words we choose and the stories we tell can broaden and deepen support for the arts. It reveals what messages resonate best across the entire political spectrum, and it offers evidence-based advice for promoting a positive narrative about the arts. Next slide, please. So our research approach was really methodical. We collaborated with Metropolitan Group, an Oregon-based public messaging firm, to learn how to improve our narrative about the arts. Then we put together a diverse team, geographically diverse, politically diverse, and demographically diverse to guide the work. This included several folks with Midwest perspectives because it was super important that NASA, to us at NASA, that this message be relevant in the heartland and not just in the coastal states. Our researchers analyzed public discourse about the arts, right? What elected officials said in their statements and their issue papers and their news quotes. We also needed the process to get outside our own bubble, right? Our own arts bubble, because if the arts had all the answers, we would have surmounted all those challenges already. So we looked into other sectors that have improved their track records. We consulted with folks from Clean Energy, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and the National Science Foundation, all of which have secured major upticks in public support in recent years. And most importantly, we had Metropolitan Group share draft messages with elected officials and legislative staffers, and we used their feedback to refine the narrative. So next slide, please. Slide 4. I love this one. This whole process was based on framing science. And an easy way to visualize that is by imagining a tree. Framing science begins with understanding your target audience's underlying values and worldviews at the root of the tree, right? Those are used to develop message frames at the ground level, which then serve as a supporting structure for stories and evidence, which are the branches and the leaves. This is a proven method that has been used to shift public will on a wide variety of issues like tobacco use, recycling, teen pregnancy, attitudes toward aging, marriage equality, and environmental stewardship. So we can use this framing approach to inform how we talk about the arts. It gives us guidance of what to say, how to say it, and in the order we should consider saying it to really make a difference. Next slide, please. So core messaging. You know, there's a lot to absorb across our message guide, and later on, we'll pop a link into the chat at the end where you can access it. But I'll walk you through the main highlights now. The overarching narrative starts this way. Arts and creativity strengthen our nation. Strengthen our nation. You can substitute community or the name of your town if you wish. You don't have to talk about the whole country, right? But whatever the unit of geography, begin with this idea of strength. Our message testing shows that this helps to change the dynamic of conversations. It strikes a positive note from the beginning. It shifts the mindset away from asking for handouts or subsidies and lifts up what the arts add to communities, right? So it grounds your conversations in a powerful stance that's not self-serving. It's not just about the arts, it's about the communities in which we live. Then the core message builds on that. I know some of you are using Zoom on small screens, so I'll read it aloud. Arts and creativity make us stronger as individuals, families, communities, states, and as a country. They are a backbone of innovation, prosperity, and thriving people and places. Public funding for arts and creativity is a high return investment that benefits every American in every city, town, and rural community nationwide. So I want to call out a few important components of this message. First, let's look at the words arts and creativity. That specific phrase tested way higher than the arts or just art. Too many people associate the word art with painting and visual arts, right? And not the full array of artistic endeavors. And adding the word creativity helps to make our sector more universal, more approachable, more relatable, right? Because we all have creativity. Also, notice the words stronger and backbone, right? They tie back to that idea of strength. This model message acknowledges individuals and families as well as communities. This puts people into the equation. It also evokes deeply held values around individualism, family attachments, and a shared sense of community. The last sentence here is really important too. It offers an inclusive vision of every community, right? This leaves nobody behind. And it also inoculates us against the mistaken notion that the arts are the province of the privileged few or the urban elite. We know that's not true, but we still have work to do to debunk that myth. Next slide, please. Benefits. So that's the core message, but we still need branches and leaves of data and stories to reinforce the narrative, to give our message tree structure and food. Here are the themes that tested the best. Some of them may seem familiar at first, but listen for the specific angles that give them an edge. So economy, right? And we've used economic arguments before, right? We've all been told that the only thing elected officials want to hear about is jobs. But our research showed that talking about arts employment is not compelling unless we couple it with the concept of how the arts help other sectors to grow. Things like tourism, restaurants, or retail. The idea of innovation is also persuasive, and tying the arts to workforce skills, that tested well too. Talking about how businesses need workers who are good communicators, idea generators, and resourceful problem solvers, all of which the arts offer. You know, healing was the #2 theme that elected officials found compelling. The people in our message testing pool were very drawn to the idea of the arts as an agent for health and healing. They were especially interested in the ability of creative therapies to heal veterans and help address addiction and the opioid crisis. Community connection and civic cohesion were also very important to them as well, especially coming out of the enforced isolation of COVID, right? It's useful to talk about how the arts strengthen the fabric of communities, right? Inculcate local pride, celebrate cherished traditions, and create places where people want to live and work and raise families. Now, education was another top theme for elected officials, and our usual arguments about the importance of the arts to academic success and workforce preparations tested pretty well with them. These messages are not a rigid recipe that you have to follow, word by word. They're more like a menu, right? First, you have to know your audience and select the arts benefits that speak to their interests, right? Then add stories from your own community to breathe life into them. These messages were developed with advocacy in mind, but they have broad applicability. You can use them when talking with potential donors. You can use them when talking with school principals or boards of education, or with potential partners at the local level. Now, these ideas assert the positive value of the arts, but from time to time, we're going to encounter resistance, right? We do. How often have we heard something like, next slide, please. I love the arts personally, but I'm not convinced they should be funded by the government. The arts should earn their way through ticket sales, or we should leave it to the private sector instead. Now, that's hogwash, it's baloney, and I know it too, but it's persistent. We've all heard variations of this from city or county or state or federal officials. So we asked Metropolitan Group to help us develop a narrative specifically for this situation. And here's what they came up with. Slide 8, please. This is about why public funding. And I'll go ahead and read this. Public funding for arts and creativity is a high return investment in every town and rural community, not only in the biggest cities. It improves lives, equips an innovative workforce, and keeps us competitive. It's a great example of government done right that fuels public-private partnerships, leverages $9 in additional funds for every public dollar invested, and puts tax dollars and decision-making authority into state and local hands. So there are a few things I'd like you to notice about this. Again, here you see that very inclusive language about every community and all Americans. But here, we speak even more bluntly about not just the big cities. This is a distinctive function of state and local government. Private funding leaves too many small organizations and rural communities behind. It's helpful for public officials to understand and frankly, take pride in the idea that government is more equitable and inclusive for their constituents. This statement addresses government done right, in partnerships and return on investment. And the 9-to-1 return statistic was very compelling to elected officials. That's the number that the National Endowment for the Arts uses to talk about the average number of matching funds each dollar of federal arts funding helps to secure. That number was perceived as credible and impressive by just about everyone, right? People on the right, the left, the center. Now, your local leverage figures could be even higher, but this particular figure is one that has federal documentation behind it. So it's really very credible. Slide 9, please. And so that's a basic overview of the messaging frame that our research recommends, but there's a lot more information available to support your advocacy and storytelling. You can download the full message guide from our site to explore all of the juicy details of this research. If you're in a hurry, you can download the one-pagers about the core messages. There's also an abundance of research to help you substantiate your case and many other advocacy tools that you can download for free. So we've got some chat links, thank you, being posted that will help you access all of this goodness. So I encourage you to check them out. And slide 10, please. Beyond the mechanics of messaging, I hope the takeaway you get from me today is the sense that advocacy matters. It absolutely does. You have important stories to tell, and your voice can make a big difference in helping to boost awareness of and support for the arts. when you use messages like this to help educate people in your community, you're actually helping to build a shared consensus about the value of the arts. Simple acts of advocacy, like sending a thank you letter to your state legislature when you receive an Indiana Arts Commission grant, help accomplish this too. So your words and stories have the power to build public will for the arts. And together we can definitely do this. We can move the arts from nicety to a necessity. And that's all I have for now, though I'm happy to answer questions during the Q&A. Thanks again for having me as a part of your homecoming gathering. I will pass things back to Connie and Bridget to talk about some examples of how positive messaging for the arts is supporting what you do in Indiana. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pam, for kicking us off. NASA presented the full Monty of this research back, I think it was in March or maybe earlier than that. But anyway, as soon as we saw it, Connie and I here at the Arts Commission, we thought, wow, this is the move. This is the way to go. And so we've been getting to work. Connie, next slide, please. So just like we ask you guys, if you're a grant recipient of the Indiana Arts Commission, to write thank you notes, we're writing thank you notes too to our legislators. They may look and sound a little bit different. There are certain things that as employees funded by state tax dollars, we're not allowed to do or ask for good reason. We're not allowed to do the same kinds of things, but we can still say thank you, and we do. And I want to just show you guys how our messaging and our thank you notes have changed. So next slide, please, Connie. So we have definitely utilized that narrative, stories, messaging, and call to action that Pam was talking about. Whenever we made our big grant announcement back in July, we sent emails to all of our state representatives and senators to let them know that an investment was just made to strengthen Hoosier communities. We throw in strength, that's like a bonus point. Every time we send out a communications, can we fit the word strength in there? Investment, words that really make legislators respond. And then we make it personal. Used to, we would just send our legislators the same press release that we send everybody else, which is fine. I mean, we still do that once the press release goes out, but we started getting more personal. We started telling them, and I use the word stories on this slide a little loosely, right? I'm just giving them a list, but I'm making it relevant. Again, I'm saying grantees in your district are these folks. They've probably heard of a lot of them. And then I come back to them with that messaging. Thank you for your support, that kind of thing, letting them know that the funds that are going out are making positive impact. And then I encourage them, I give a little call to action. And it's really simple. Just celebrate with us on Facebook, on social. And this is the first year that I've actually had legislators and their assistants reach back out to me and say, hey, thanks, Bridget, for this information. Can we have the mailing addresses for these folks so that they can reach out and say thank you for the work that's going on in their own communities? So that's just one easy little switch that we've done. It takes time. I'm not going to lie, it takes time, but I think it's well worth it. Next slide, please, Connie. We're also translating that into not only just how we communicate to legislators, right? Or say thank you from the Arts Commission, but also how we frame up our own press and news releases. So this makes it look like it's really long, and I promise it's not. I might sound a little long-winded now, but I promise I'm not. This isn't a long press release. But again, using that narrative that this is making positive cultural, economic, educational changes in Indiana, that it's an investment, we're strengthening communities. Next slide, please, Connie. Following up with some stories. In this press release, I get a little bit more specific. I think sometimes when we make these big, large, whether in this case, it's an announcement about $3 million strengthening communities. Maybe it's a capital project you just worked on. Maybe it's a large gathering you just held. bring it back. Why is it important? And so we drew out a couple of examples based on that research that Pam shared. What is important to folks right now? So we chose one that talked about substance abuse and helping folks that have been incarcerated. We talked about education. Those are topics that really people respond well to and say, okay, yeah, this is right for public funding. Next slide, please, Connie. And so then again, going back to that messaging, just reinforcing that. And in this case, we did it with a quote from our outgoing executive director, Louis Rickey, emphasizing that from rural communities to our largest cities, we're seeing improvement in quality of life, driving economic development, it's not just buzzwords. This is reality. This is real. I think sometimes, especially as Hoosiers, we're super humble and it feels weird to toot our own horn. But toot away, this is great. And you should be sharing it. If you're not going to tell your story with strength and passion, who is? You've got to do that. Next slide, please, Connie. So I just wanted to share too, just really the same kind of thing that I was sharing in my first slide, that not just when we are making a big announcement about grants that went out, in that case, it's super relevant, definitely, to let our legislators know they voted on our budget. And I think my office is dimming. Apologies for the different light setting. But yeah, not just letting them know whenever a bunch of money went out the door, right? But also letting them know when their constituents are involved with us. So I blurred out the actual Senate districts just for privacy's sake here. But for Indiana Arts Homecoming, made sure to email all of the legislators who had constituents presenting. And for the first time, we've gotten a great response from our legislators. Some of them have joined. Some of them had said, yeah, maybe we'll join, send us the link right afterwards. And we're recording all of these sessions so we can send those out too afterwards so that they can reach out to their constituents or join in real time and support the arts, just giving them the opportunity, not asking for anything. Like I said, as a state employee being paid by tax dollars, it's not appropriate for me to ask them for anything monetary or to bring that up or to lobby. That's not appropriate. But what is appropriate is letting them know when their constituents are engaging with our agency. And so that's what we're doing. And again, you see that on the right. We just did Lifelong Arts Indiana. I hope some of you maybe have joined that today. But those are just a couple examples of how we're doing this. Connie, next slide. So I want to bring up some key ingredients. This is kind of my checklist whenever I reach out to legislators or any kind of stakeholder. I introduce myself. For you, if you're introducing yourself to your state representative or senator or congressional member, introduce yourself as a constituent. Make sure you make yourself relevant to them and explain why they're relevant to you, why you're reaching out. Keep it as short and sweet as possible. We've all gotten really super long emails in our inbox, maybe even that press release you looked at that I showed, and you're like, Bridget, that's way too long. People don't have a lot of time to read. Best case scenario, they're going to skim it. So give them some bullet points, make it quick, just give them the highlights. Keep it as short and sweet as possible. Invite folks to do something, whether it's just celebrating with you on social media, whether it's inviting them to an event or to have coffee. Just a simple thanks for support really goes a long way. And then fill in this blank. Why does whatever you're communicating about strengthen your community? How is that working? Whether it's a legislator you're talking to, maybe it's the mayor, maybe it's your dad that you're trying to get to support the arts or come to a theater performance or something, or come shop at your small business. Why does that thing strengthen your community? How does it do that? We all know it does. And what is really cool about the tools that Pam provided is that NASA lays it out to you in a way that is concise and really sells that message. Next slide, please, Connie. Oh, yes. So I wanted to bring up, so you want to email a state legislator. It is really easy to find out in Indiana who your state and congressional representatives are. Oh, no, hang on just a second while I turn the light back on. Okay. It does that if you don't move for a little bit of time. Anyway, okay, so you want to email your state legislator. Like I said, it's really easy to find out. You just click on that link. It'll take you straight there. You just put in your address. I put in here just our office building here. And if I lived here at the office, my state representative would be Senator Sandlin, and that's District 36. And so something that's really nice about how the state of Indiana does things is, at least on the state level, it's really easy to plug in the email address for your state representatives and senators. So State Senate District 36, that email address is just s36@IGA, that's Indiana General Assembly, @in.gov. Same for House District. If I lived here in the office, my district would be number 97. So that email address is h97@iag.in.gov. Please note too that whenever you email these email addresses, you might get a kickback email that says, hey, thanks, I get a bunch of emails, I'll try and get back to you. Generally speaking, they're going to get back to you. I get those kickback emails all the time, and I normally have a follow-up with somebody. So pro tip, and then also, state representatives, state legislators, they're not in office for forever. There's turnover. And so what's nice about this system too is you're not having to keep, although I think you should keep track of who exactly your legislators are. This is an easy way to make sure you're always emailing the right person, right? Okay, next slide, please, Connie. Yeah, so before I turn it over to my colleague Connie Breaux to talk about some things that we're seeing out in our sector here in Indiana, is advocacy is something that you do every day without even realizing it. So I just showed some very direct examples of how we're doing advocacy here within the agency. And then, we, of course, as a part of, if you receive a grant from the Arts Commission, part of that agreement is that you'll also do those direct thank you notes. And that's great, please do those. But advocacy is something that doesn't just happen when you email or send a letter to a legislator. It happens every time you post on social media. Every time you're hosting an event, you create a new program, you make a phone call. You're letting folks know what your story is, what's important to you, and how that relates back to them, how that strengthens them and their community. That is advocacy as well. So Connie, I'm going to hand it over to you to show us some real world examples too out in the sector.
Yes, thank you so much, Bridget, and thank you to Pam for kicking us off with that great start. With this idea that Bridget shared of advocacy being something that we do every day and keeping that in mind, I really want to talk about what utilizing this messaging strategy looks like in our everyday communications, which brings me back to these areas of emphasis that Pam spoke on earlier in our conversation. With these areas of economy, health and well-being, community cohesion, and education. These are the benefits that we are looking as the IAC to emphasize in our everyday communications, but are also things that we are seeing people and arts organizations from around the state start to utilize. And we want to share with you a couple of examples of where we've really seen this done well to give you an idea of how you can implement that in your communication strategy. So first, I'm going to start off by sharing just what this looks like in terms of how this has changed, how we talk about ourselves and our programmings on our social media. On the left, you'll see a Facebook post that emphasizes the economic benefit of the cultural district program here in Indiana. So as you'll see, it says cultural districts are magnets for commerce, bringing money into a community through tourism and its associated revenues. Instead of just talking about cultural districts as a program where you can go visit, we really want to drive home that point of these are economic drivers and have huge impacts in the communities where they exist. Another example is an Instagram post you'll see on the right. In this Instagram post, we're highlighting one of the recipients of our Arts Project Support Arts Trust funding. And what we really loved about this program and wanted to make sure that we highlight is that it does a really great job of explaining how arts enrichment is so important in early education and how they can partner with families to make sure that that happens. So by highlighting not just a grant recipient, but how the work they're doing, it really brings benefit and strengthens their community through education. We can really go back to that messaging strategy that Pam shared and make sure that we are touching upon those points that really resonate with people. This isn't something that we're just sharing in social media, though. It's also, as Bridget showed earlier, something that we're using as we talk about ourselves in press releases and in our written communications. So I'll start with this top quote from a press release: "From rural towns to big cities, arts and creativity strengthen the fabric of Indiana's communities." These funds will allow Indiana communities to continue to bolster their recovery efforts, celebrate their local culture, and promote connection and cohesion. That was from an announcement of grant funding, but we really decided to take a step back, and in this quote, it looks at the benefits that that funding will provide and just makes that connection more explicit. And in this bottom quote that you'll see, Arts Commission and the Indiana Small Business Development Center improved the economic resilience of over 100 arts-based small businesses. So again, just keeping in mind, what does this programming do? What does this funding do? And how is it strengthening communities and making sure that we stay connected to that message in our communications? But, aside from the IAC, we are seeing wonderful, wonderful content and wonderful stories being told by our local arts organizations throughout the state. And so I want to share with you some examples of how this can be done in your local community. So here on the left, we see a Facebook post from the Leo Cedarville Foundation that says, "We're thrilled to be helping to add to the amazing Northeast Indiana Life community." And this is actually a photo of the town of Leo Cedarville just added their first public art piece. And this is a picture of the work in progress. And they have done a wonderful job emphasizing the role that this art piece has played in their community in terms of developing community pride and community cohesion. And they are doing such great work about telling that story. And you can see that the community is really committed and really supportive of the work that this foundation is doing. On the right, we see a post from the Batesville Area Arts Council that again comes back to this idea of sharing how education can strengthen our communities and the role that arts education plays. As we see here, this program teaches students the value of self-love and confidence while learning different dance moves and style. By really pulling back and focusing on both wellness and education, this post does such a great job of hitting on so many of the areas that resonate with people in terms of strengthening communities. And again, we're seeing this in written communications as well. So I think that we actually have some people from the Tampa Arts Federation here on this call. So shout out to you for this wonderful communication. But this is a great example of really emphasizing benefit of a program that you in your communication. So what I love here is this quote: "The implementation of this project in each county will 1, remove blight, 2, create tourist destinations, 3, increase property values in adjacent areas, 4, provide community pride and ownership, 5, improve quality of life, and 6, increase workforce retention." This quote from their press release does a wonderful job of explaining just how valuable this program is to their community. And definitely check out the Win Walls program for those of you on the call, and the way that Tippecanoe Arts Federation talks about this program, because they do a great job of utilizing the kind of messaging that the NASA team has identified as very strong. And finally, I'm going to show you an example from Traditional Arts Indiana. So Traditional Arts Indiana shared this quote on their website about some of their creative aging programming. "Through support from the National Endowment for the Arts and Indiana University's Center for Rural Engagement, this initiative aims to help older adults living in South Central Indiana stave off feelings of loneliness, boredom, helplessness, that may challenge many elders living in this region." This is such a great example of recalling the benefits to wellness and health that the arts can have in your community. Traditional Arts Indiana does a wonderful job of talking about those benefits to health that arts and creativity have, and really help them tell the story of the role that they play in their community. And I also encourage you to check out their communications, because that's a great example of how to emphasize the health benefits of the programming that you're doing. With all these examples that we shared, I think a common thread that really takes these posts and it helps them apply this messaging is the idea of making explicit the benefit that arts and creativity have in our lives. As people that work in the arts and love the arts, and as there are so many artists on the call, we all know the benefit that the arts have in our lives and in our communities. And I think that sometimes we think that everyone has that same understanding, and really helping to make these more explicit and explaining to other people and making sure that they see the value of the programming that we know is here is where we can take our communications to the next level. So as you can see with these examples and the way these Indiana organizations are talking about themselves and their programming, sharing about yourself from a position of strength is easy to begin, and you can definitely get started in your own organization. Advocacy, as Bridget and Pam have said, begins at the local level and can be as easy as shifting to the way you tell your story about your work. All of you here on this call and throughout the state are doing wonderful work, and telling your story and sharing the good that you do from a position of strength can get you started on a path of advocating for yourself and your organization. So thank you all so much for joining us. And at this time, we would love to open the floor for any questions that you might have.
Connie, if we have a moment while we're waiting on questions, could I mention a tiny story that Bridget actually inspired? Well, first of all, thank you both. Y'all did a fantastic job. I really appreciated seeing not only how the IAC is using this work, but how organizations across the state are really creating powerful messages. So that just excites me so much. But when Bridget pointed out the thanking of your legislators, it reminded me of something very specific that demonstrates the power of that, right? I mean, as arts organization leaders and advocates, I mean, we are told all the time, right? I've been told for 25 years, thank your legislator. And I think sometimes we default to thinking that, well, we're going to do it when we get around to it, and it's a good thing to do, but God, those people are so busy. They must get so much communication. It's not really going to matter. I mean, is that going to make a difference? And here is one example of why I know it makes an incredible difference. A couple of years ago, I was testifying before Congress, specifically in the House Appropriations Subcommittee that has oversight of the National Endowments for the Arts budget. Right. So I was testifying, and then I had the opportunity to answer questions. And one member of Congress decided he didn't have a question, but he wanted to make a statement about arts advocates. And he said, this statement goes all the way back to when I was in state at the local level and in the state legislature. He says, advocates from all sectors, they all line up to ask for money. It was only the arts advocates who consistently thanked me and other legislators for the funding, for those investments. And that has never left me. It still impacts me today. No one else is lined up in the thank you line, right? But that has stayed with him, and that informs him and influences him. And he understands from his constituents that this is important, and it's important enough that they're not just lining up to ask for money, right? They're lining up throughout the year to connect to performances and events and to say thank you. That really matters. And I heard it literally at our nation's capital in the middle of a public hearing with the Arts Endowments budget under consideration. So it matters. It matters. It has an impact. So never doubt that those small actions can really be powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too, while you guys are thinking of questions, think too about what challenges are you facing? What roadblocks can we help move out of the way here together in our last few moments of this session? I wanted to ask too, Pam, you know, with this move to the digital space, I feel like, you know, we are all so zoomed out. We are so social media out. How have you guys found at NASA a way to keep legislators engaged with you and your programming?
Yeah, you know, that's a work in progress for us as we go. I'll tell you a little bit about some new thinking around a different kind of strategy that can be done face-to-face in district or can be done online, but to help really amplify opportunities with the messaging strategy, a new approach we are going to develop in our new fiscal year is to really connect the dots between the right messengers and these messages. And so we will identify some members of Congress who are rising in the ranks, appropriators who are rising in the ranks, and that we know we need to have a bigger impact on, right? So we'll identify those, then we'll work with those state arts agencies to help identify the right messengers from the states, because I'm not necessarily the right messenger for a particular member of Congress, or neither is the executive director of the state arts agency. Perhaps it depends, right, on where the relationships are. So we're going to really get the most compelling messengers, and then we're going to bring them to school, right? And we're going to work with them and teach them about the messaging strategy, develop talking points, and really facilitate their engagement with those rising members in Congress who are becoming more and more powerful in their roles as appropriators, to try to make the difference where it counts. So that's just one strategy where we're just we're targeting where our best opportunities and needs lie, right? So and that could be an interesting strategy at the state level too, right? I mean, you have your champions, and then you have folks who are rising in power who may be able to be moved, right, with the right messages and messengers. So let's connect the dots and try to make that research sing, right, and create new opportunity to begin moving elected officials to our cause.
Absolutely. And thinking about that, identifying folks with influence, what are signs that you look for that could be applicable to at the local level? How do you know who you should be talking to?
Good question. I think that talking to staffers, right, whether they're legislative staffers or city hall staffers, can be a part of that. Whether we're talking about staffers at Congress or in states, they really have a good understanding of how things and people and power is moving in elected bodies. And so I think that would be incredibly beneficial. Also, if your arts advocacy network works with a lobbyist, they are gold mines of information around how power is shifting, moving forward, right? And so before every election, they do the calculations, about where the power is going to lie, who really needs to be influenced, no matter who wins the particular election. They are doing the calculation on every side of the equation. And so lobbyists can be really helpful because they're on the pulse of power shift, staffers, pulse of power shift. And you can also look at committee co-chairs who are positioned to be rising chairs of committees, right? And be building the bench in that way.
Great, thank you. And before we go, I just want to ask too, if folks want to be more involved on the national scale, Pam, how can they be more involved with your organization or other advocacy organizations that you know of? Sure.
Well, a lot of sands are shifting in the advocacy space right now. Our organization is certainly a great place to work from. We have an entire section of our website dedicated to advocacy, and so that's open and available to folks. There is a sort of a new some new work being done with state advocacy networks as they come together nationally to be supportive of advocacy in all the states. So their newly envisioned network is actually going through governance voting this week. And so that network is called the Creative States Coalition. And so I think soon we'll be able to see live their presence on the website. on a website, and I think they'll be really important to follow because they exist and will exist to strengthen advocacy for all the states, right? And so the Creative States Coalition will be following them, we'll be partnering with them. And so what that means, we'll bring their information, as appropriate into our website and communications as well. But everyone's welcome to check out nasa-arts.org for advocacy information, tools, research, etc. Lots of those are kind of beefy. And we also have sort of the quick one-pagers as well, because sometimes you just need that in a rush, right? To get the simple messages out. But yeah, be on the lookout for new information before the end of this year from the Creative States Coalition. I think that's going to be an important source for all of us.
Thank you so much, Pam. And we have a question that came in from the chat. This is from Janice. Any new advocacy strategies you've discovered during these pandemic times?
Yeah, and interestingly, I think the arts offer something special in the strategies, because we are enlivening these Zoom spaces in ways many industries are not, right? I mean, take your own conference and those creative breaks and those opportunities for inspiration and hands-on goodness and fun and engagement. So certainly we're seeing virtual town halls that are successful, right? And that are engaging arts advocates, engaging elected officials. So we're seeing the arts capitalize on virtual meeting spaces. And I think, frankly, our practices are only going to improve, because we've been learning a lot in this past year and a half about how to completely pivot into the virtual space. But we're seeing folks, convene their one-on-one meetings virtually with members of Congress, members of state legislatures, and I think that's good and helpful and efficient for folks. So we're realizing efficiencies, but I think where arts advocacy and advocates are concerned, we're seeing creativity that bring those spaces to life in a more compelling way than so many other kinds of meetings. And that kind of creativity is appreciated by elected officials and everyone who needs a little more life inside these little Zoom boxes.
Thank you so much, Pam, and thank you so much to everyone for tuning in. I will go ahead and hand it off to Bridget to wrap us out, but I want to thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Connie. And Connie, if you could get ready the YouTube link for tomorrow's keynote, I want to make sure we're leaving everyone with that, because I think this is the last session of the day, the last breakouts. I know we have some meetups coming up, so be sure to check those out too. But I want to especially shout out our keynote for tomorrow, John Green, author here in Indianapolis, and Sarah Urist Green. She's a curator. She is the host of PBS's The Art Assignment. Just a fantastic power couple. If there was ever a word for that, these are the folks. So please join us tomorrow for that. And big thank you to Pam. Pam, I hope you can see in this this session how much the work that NASA has done with that messaging kit has spoken to us here in Indiana.
I can see it. I'm so jazzed.
Yeah, we are using it. We are using that toolkit. We're using that. And so I encourage you guys too to visit NASA's website and check out those tools for yourself. I mean, literally, you probably noticed in some of those press releases, we are copying and pasting what Pam and her team have prepared, changing nation to Indiana and keeping it moving. And it's served us well. It's honest, it's authentic, it's true. It's just a different way for the arts to think about themselves, for us to think about this from a position of strength. And I think that's really cool. So thank you, Pam, and your team for shepherding that forward for all of us here in Indiana and for around the country. We really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone who stuck with us on this session. I hope everyone got something out of it. Please feel free to contact Connie and myself. Pam's team, all of their information is online if you need help navigating that toolkit. We're here to help. So thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed homecoming today and will join us for a meetup, or if not, for a keynote tomorrow. Bye-bye.